Can you loan me $10?
Huh? $10? I couldn't grasp what he was saying, but I let David into the house anyway. It was hard to see in the dark, but not only were David's clothes wet, they were also very worn and tattered. His jacket was stained and dirty all over, and his pants were torn as if caught on something. Simply put, his clothes were in shambles. When I took off his wet socks, the color, which was originally white, had turned brown. Seeing my grandson, David, in such a state, so different from how Tom and Emma were dressed during the day, made my heart heavy. However, I didn't show it. "Aren't you hungry?" and asked. David shook his head silently. "I just want to borrow $10. And said, "I'll give you the money." "Is it for allowance?" "But why did you come all this way in the rain?"
Please. I want to go home quickly.
Huh? You came all this way just to borrow $10? It takes about 3 hours to get here from Tom's house. My husband silently stood up, checked the locks on several windows, and simply said, "Let's go." Sat down near David and gently stroked his head. Then, tears that David had been holding back started to overflow. My name is Kate. I'm only 52, but having 2 grandchildren is a small source of pride for me. I married a farmer from the South when I was 22, introduced by relatives, and quickly married. Knowing nothing about farming initially, I became a respectable farmer's wife, despite the trouble I caused my in-laws. My husband, the eldest son of a farmer, was very quiet and serious, so most of our conversations were about farming. Even when meeting our son Tom for the first time, my husband barely showed emotion and returned to his farm work after only a slight smile. I fondly remember those times, but I can't forget the sad expression on my husband's face I saw for the first time. It was when we received news that our daughter-in-law had passed away after a short illness. At the beginning of the busy fall season for farmers. While my husband was checking the condition of the parched ground, I said in a choked voice,
Tom called, she's gone.
Whether he didn't hear me or chose not to respond, he continued to silently gaze somewhere.
Tom called, his wife passed away.
I repeated. Without turning towards me, he continued to staring. I wonder how Tom is feeling now. As I grimaced with a heart-wrenching pain, my husband came over, patted my back, and looked up at the sky. His expression was incredibly calm and sad. Behind my husband, who looked sorrowfully, the cornfield shone brilliantly in the autumn sun. Maybe the cornfield appeared to sparkle because my eyes were filled with tears. I am a terrible person. Not because I am crying for my son's wife who suffered and died from illness, but because I am crying for my son and grandchildren who have lost a loved one and are in despair. I kept apologizing in my heart, saying, I'm sorry. After a while, Tom came to our house. He asked us to take care of his children, David and Sarah, for a while. After his wife's funeral, Tom seemed to be working very hard, stoically. The grandchildren started attending school from our house. Once, I asked Tom why he didn't live with his children, and he replied,
It brings back memories.
With a truly pained expression.
Memories?
Of what?
When I'm with David and Sarah. I remember the times we all lived together as a family. It's too painful.
So what? The kids are suffering without their mom, and if you, their dad, don't support them, who will?
I know. I understand, but...
Watching Tom struggle to speak, I couldn't bring myself to blame him further. I understood that we were making the grandchildren feel lonely, but I couldn't simply tell Tom to cheer up. Believing that time would solve everything, we did our best to love and care for the grandchildren. Years passed, and Tom brought a woman named Emma to our house.
Emma was about 12 years younger than Tom, and unlike his late wife's large, round eyes, Emma had slender eyes. While the children were drawing in another room, Tom started to speak formally.
"I'd like to introduce you. This is Emma."
Emma finished with a simple greeting of "nice to meet you." Tom reported to us in a matter-of-fact tone that he intended to marry her. My husband didn't say anything, so I said,
"Good luck."
And smiling at Emma, she quietly nodded and smiled back. I thought to myself how nice it was that Emma seemed like a quiet, good person. But as the grandchildren showed Tom their drawings in the next room, hoping for his praise, I noticed Emma's expression darken slightly and a soft sigh escape her. A slight doubt crept into my heart, yet Tom seemed unbothered, happily looking at the children's drawings. It's true, suddenly becoming a mother to two, she probably doesn't know what kind of expression to wear yet. I reassured myself and celebrated Tom and Emma's marriage. With the marriage, the grandchildren moved back to Tom's house, and my husband and I returned to our usual peaceful days. When David entered middle school, my husband and I visited Tom's house. But there was a certain coldness from everyone, including Tom, when we handed over our congratulatory gift. David, perhaps because he was in his teenage years, was not very talkative and seemed more gloomy, possibly due to his bangs covering his eyes.
"Congratulations on starting middle school, David. Have you decided on a club to join yet?"
"Not yet."
"I see. You've always been fast on your feet since you were little. Maybe track and field would be good for you."
Is this attitude typical of boys his age? David seemed sleepy as he listened to me, his eyelids nearly drooping. I casually thought I had seen the clothes David was wearing a few years back. Considering how quickly children grow at this age, the fact that he could still wear clothes from years ago seemed like his development might be a bit delayed. So after much thought, even if it was meddling, we decided to frequently bring vegetables to Tom's house, thinking it was the least we could do as farmers. We also delivered seasonal fruits from our farm, but one day when Tom received the fruits from me, "We appreciate it, but could you not come by the house for a while?" he said. It was lonely, but believing that my son and grandchildren were overcoming the absence of their wife and mother and cherishing their new life as a family, I left with a smile, pretending to be an understanding grandmother. After the harvest season passed and spring came again for planting. On one of those days, when we feel the cycle of the seasons on our skin, we, also growing a small amount of organic vegetables alongside farming and delivering them to contracted restaurants, happened to see Tom and Emma while making a delivery. The restaurant in the city center had been renovated with trendy menus and decor, offering luxurious desserts and homemade specialty dishes. In the elegant atmosphere, people seemed to enjoy delicious meals, and at one of the tables, Tom and Emma were laughing and facing each other. After finishing the delivery and checking the invoice, I went back to the truck where my husband was waiting and told him about seeing Tom and them. While checking the invoice, "Why don't you call them?" my husband said in a low voice. "Hello? What's up, Mom? I'm kind of busy right now." Tom's voice through the phone sounded unmistakably annoyed, asking what I wanted. Stammering, I said while looking,
"Sorry to bother you. Just wondering how you're doing,"
at my husband sitting next to me in the truck. After a few seconds of silence and a contemplative atmosphere on the other side of the phone, Tom said, "We're doing fine."
"All right, then. That's good."
I hung up, and my husband started the truck's engine. I don't think they're doing anything wrong. We're farmers, so we're basically always busy and never have the chance to go to a restaurant during the day like that. When Tom was young, we always went out as a family. I'm not trying to impose my values on my son, but everything Tom and Emma were wearing seemed very high-end. Far from what you'd expect of active parents raising 2 children. But I suppose that's also imposing my values, I thought. Soon after, it started pouring rain at night. My husband was restless, watching the rain outside through the small window in the living room. While we're grateful for the rain, too much in a short period can turn the fields into mud. When it was completely dark outside, the doorbell rang. Wondering who it could be at this hour and in such rain, I opened the door to find David standing there. Holding a small umbrella, David, small and short for a 13-year-old boy, reached out his hand. "Can you loan me $10?
Huh? $10?
I couldn't grasp what he was saying, but let David into the house anyway. It was hard to see in the dark, but David's clothes were not only wet but also very worn and damaged. His jacket was stained and dirty all over, and his pants had tears as if they were caught on something. Simply put, his clothes were in shambles. After removing his wet socks, the originally white color had turned brown. Seeing my grandson, David, in such a state, so different from the well-dressed appearances of Tom and Emma I saw during the day, made my heart heavy, but I didn't let it show on my face and asked, "Aren't you hungry?" David shook his head silently. "I just want to borrow $10. And said, "I'll give you the money." "Is it for your allowance?" "But why did you walk all this way in the rain?" "Please, I just want to get home quickly."
Huh? You came all this way just to borrow $10?
Walking here from Tom's house would take about 3 hours. Puzzled, I helped David out of his wet clothes, except for his underwear, and wrapped him in a large bath towel. As I dried him off, David looked away from me with an awkward expression. My husband silently stood up, checked the locks on several windows, and simply said, "Let's go." Sat down near David, and gently stroked his head. Then, tears that David had been holding back began to overflow. Even as tears streamed down his face, David remained expressionless and said, "Sarah, she has a fever. It's 39 degrees. She looks really in pain. That's why I want to buy some cold medicine and get home quickly."
Cold medicine? What are Dad and Mom doing?
I asked David, but he didn't reply, just kept crying. My husband's face came into my view, and I caught my breath. It was a look of silent, desperate restraint, the likes of which I had never seen on my usually quiet and gentle husband. He quickly put on his jacket, paused as he reached for the truck keys, turned to David, and asked, "Do you want to come with us?" David nodded vigorously, so my husband draped his jacket over David's shoulders without a word.
"I want to go too. I want to come along,"
I said, almost childishly, to which my husband gave a slight smile and agreed. We hurried to Tom's house. The bad weather made visibility poor, and the sound of the windshield wipers echoed inside the car. I felt crushed by a sense of unease and fear that something ominous was happening, yet I couldn't bring myself to ask David what had happened. I wondered how to reconcile the happy faces of Tom and Emma, seen dining at the restaurant during the day, with the expressionless face of David sitting beside me now, all under the same roof as a family. In the silent car, I was the only one trembling. I dreaded what awaited us. I had noticed Emma's coldness towards Tom's children, David and Sarah, on the day she first came with Tom. Yet I chose to interpret my slight unease in a way that suited me. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." It took about 40 minutes to reach Tom's house. The outside light was off, and no light or signs of life could be seen through the closed curtains. Thinking that Sarah might be suffering alone inside with a high fever made me anxious. As I struggled to fit the key David gave us into the lock without any light. Upon entering and rushing to Sarah's room, her face, barely visible under the pale light and peeking out from the blanket, seemed discolored, almost reddish-black. Immediately, my husband placed his hand on Sarah's forehead, looked at her,
"Call an ambulance,"
and said. Actions from then on were swift. The ambulance arrived within minutes of our call, and we had already prepared Sarah to be moved. My husband, upon seeing the ambulance outside, carried a dazed Sarah out, handing her over to the paramedics efficiently. At the hospital, we learned from David that Sarah had been running a fever for about 5 days. Why did it get to this point? I began to ask David but swallowed the rest of my words. It wasn't fair to blame him. What could a middle school boy do about his sister's fever continuing for 5 days? Rather, he should be praised for seeking help from us alone. Imagining David walking desperately through the downpour and dark streets, I whispered, "I'm sorry," and hugged him. Sarah was suspected of having pneumonia and had to be hospitalized overnight. My husband borrowed my phone to call Tom himself.
"Come now,"
simply stating. My husband then sat motionless in a chair, seemingly exhausted in the hospital's waiting room at midnight. David was quietly sleeping, wrapped in a borrowed blanket. After a while, Tom and Emma arrived at the hospital entrance by taxi, looking slightly drunk and weary as they walked towards us.
"Mom, how's Sarah? Do you even understand what's happening with Sarah? Come on, calling an ambulance just because she has a fever? Isn't that a bit much?"
Tom chuckled, seeking agreement from Emma next to him. Emma narrowed her eyes even more and made a troubled face while holding her elbow.
"Hospitalized for a cold. Who do you think is going to pay for that? Emma, do you actually care about Sarah? I'm here because I'm concerned, aren't I? You two were out dining at a restaurant while your child had a fever."
I raised my voice, to which Emma looked at me with a scoff.
"Are parents not allowed to eat if their child has a fever? You took our daughter to the hospital without our consent and got her admitted. And now, because she might have pneumonia, you put her in a private room, and we have to pay the extra charge. That's fine, right? Just worry and leave everything else to us."
Emma, contrary to her gentle appearance, glared at me with a rather domineering attitude. I was at a loss for words, feeling nauseous from the turmoil welling up inside me. Then, a large hand gently touched my back. My husband's hand. Feeling the warmth of his quiet, strong support, I took a deep breath.
"Tom." "Huh? What's up?"
Tom flinched for a moment. At the same time, Emma stepped in front of Tom to confront my husband. But he completely ignored her and only spoke to Tom, looking past her.
"Are you happy? What kind of question is that out of the blue? Of course, I'm happy. Emma and I are getting along fine. Is that so? Do you think David and Sarah are happy?"
Tom remained silent, just staring at my husband, when David, who had been sleeping in the waiting room chair, woke up and looked at us expressionlessly. Then Emma rushed to David, pulled him by the arm towards Tom,
"Let's go home,"
and urged,
"Whether it's pneumonia or just a fever, resting at home will cure it. Let's get Sarah home quickly. It's a waste to keep her hospitalized." "Yeah, well, that's true."
"Are you both out of your minds? She needs to rest until the fever goes down."
"That's what we were doing at home before you decided to drag her to the hospital. It's better for Sarah to rest at home than spend money on hospitalization."
Before Emma could finish her argument, my husband pulled David away from her and hugged him, shaking his head slightly. "You two, it's no use anymore. We can't entrust these kids to you."
"What are you talking about? David is our child. Mine and Tom's. Sarah's condition isn't just about pneumonia. The doctor said she's also suffering from severe malnutrition, and David, too, is far from normal. While holding David, my husband's words trailed off. This is ridiculous, Emma said, dismissively pushing Tom's back, suggesting they take Sarah and leave. I felt an urge to reach out and save Tom, who looked troubled, yet unable to go against Emma's wishes. Tom doesn't want to lose what he's found in Emma after overcoming the grief of losing his beloved wife. So, he probably can't oppose Emma. What can I do for Tom, who's about to make a wrong turn? Maybe Tom is being deceived by a bad woman like Emma. But Tom, as a parent and a person, if he can't protect his young children, David and Sarah, even knowing all this, I can't forgive him anymore. Tom! Almost unconsciously, I slapped Tom's cheek. I had never raised my hand to him since he was a child, and never thought the day would come when I would do so to my son, now grown so large. I was shocked by my own actions. Tom looked at me, stunned, wondering why he was slapped. The doctor said, given the current state of David and Sarah, it's a clear case of child neglect. There was even a suggestion to consult the police about you two. Police? Wait a minute. But I asked them to wait. I didn't want to ruin your lives over a suspicion. I choked up, unable to finish my sentence. Surely, what followed would be words that could shatter Tom's family relations. But the thought that David and Sarah might continue to suffer if I remained silent compelled me to speak. I intend to contact the police and take appropriate action. What are you talking about? Afterwards, Emma and I ended up yelling at each other in the hospital late at night, prompting the nurses, who appeared annoyed, to come and intervene between us. Contact the police? Take appropriate action? Do you seriously think doing that will make David and Sarah happy? Held back by the hospital staff, Emma shouted at me. I clenched my fists, trying to think of something to say back, but nothing came to mind. David remained expressionless, held by my husband. I don't know how to make this child happy. Can anyone prove that I even managed to make my own son, Tom, happy? Emma, do you actually intend to make David and Sarah happy? Think about happiness? Yes, happiness. No one knows whether they can make someone happy or not. But I think what's more important than wishing for their happiness is to think about it. We're adults. We should think about how David, who couldn't do anything by himself, who didn't call an ambulance despite his sister having a terrible fever, and just walked in the heavy rain to seek help, can grow up to be strong and wise. That's what I believe. That's just idealistic talk. It's not my child, after all. Emma muttered in a voice so low only I could hear, and noticing her lonely expression, I gasped. Emma and Tom, who demanded immediate discharge procedures, were met by a doctor who had preemptively contacted the police, leading to their being taken away by several officers. Emma protested, "I'll sue you for defamation." However, it turned out that there had been reports to child welfare services from neighbors suspecting abuse, and a meeting was set up a few days later with child welfare workers. I later learned that the fruits and vegetables we had been giving them were being sold online. And moreover, Tom and Emma had been demanding money from the deceased former wife's parents for David and Sarah's educational expenses, with a significant amount deposited in their account. But most of it was spent by Tom and Emma, leaving David and Sarah with hardly any proper meals. Is it someone else's place to dictate how much and what a child should eat? During the discussion with child welfare workers, Emma's attitude gradually became indifferent as the staff explained the situation, suggesting moving the children to a facility.
Tom started to panic and defend himself.
It's not like that. Sure, I might not have paid enough attention, but David and Sarah are my children too. It can't be a facility. But considering the current situation.
As the worker elaborated, my husband stood up.
But those kids are my kids.
And addressed Tom and Emma.
You two should stop being parents. We will take care of the children.
Though it was a brief statement from my always quiet and calm husband, Tom and Emma were silenced by his determination and resolution, hanging their heads in defeat. Tom looked up at me, seeking help. Mom. I was deceived by Emma.
You might have been a terrible parent, but speaking more will only make you a worse man, Tom.
Tom sighed softly without responding. Though Tom and Emma did not divorce, the rumor that they were investigated by the police for child neglect made their life uncomfortable. David and Sarah came to live with us. It turned out they were distant because Emma had lied to them, saying we disliked the grandchildren. But as the misunderstanding cleared, their smiles became more frequent. In the crisp autumn breeze under a clear sky, I took a deep breath, looking over the golden cornfields. The harsh summer had passed, and it was now the season of harvest. In the evening, countless dragonflies flew, their wings reflecting the sunset. In this magical scenery, I could see David and Sarah's figures from behind.
It's time to go home.
When I called out to them, they ran towards me with big smiles.
Hey, what's for dinner tonight? Let's see. How about some grilled salmon? The first time I ate vegetable at Grandma's house, I thought it was incredibly delicious. I wonder why. Now, I feel it's even more delicious. I get it. It's seriously good. I can eat at them in a second.
Sarah laughed.
That's an exaggeration. Impossible.
As David made a humorous face. With each gentle breeze, the cornfields waved, and my husband's car came to pick us up from the other side of this scenic view.
Let's go home.
David and Sarah nodded with smiles. So bright I couldn't help but shed tears.